We will begin and we'll start with call to order. Roll call. Commissioner Kivenfar, Commissioner Kennard, Commissioner Gottlieb, Commissioner Morgan. We have a quorum.
We don't have to repeat that part.
And we have a quorum.
Feel free to test.
Number 3 on the agenda, review of agenda. If there are any items that arose after the 72-hour posting deadline, this is the point in the meeting when a vote may be taken to add the item to the agenda. Item number 4, public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the commission on matters within the jurisdiction of the city of Seaside, but not on this agenda, may do so during the public comment period for up to 3 minutes. Comments on specific agenda items are heard under that item. For the public record, please state your name.
Hello, my name is Juliana Fiala. I was just going to point out that on the website, it says that this meeting is the second Tuesday of the month, and somewhere else it says now. But if that could be adjusted, maybe there will be more participation. Thank you.
Number 5, approval of minutes, which we do not have. Number 6, business items. Number A, election of officers, nominate and vote for chair and vice chair.
Presentation.
So I did send out an email earlier today about this item. We are missing one of our commissioners. Whether or not they show up tonight, I don't know. The elections are a requirement of all of the commissions. And then give this a second. I don't think this does the next slide. That might be the difference between the two document types. No, you can keep this one. You're just going to have to go to every slide. No, because it's a page down versus the next slide. Keep going. Keep going. Here we go. So this is the official code language of the Muni Code regarding how each commission or advisory board has to have both a chair and a vice chair, that they happen on an annual basis. And if we don't do this tonight, we can continue this item in the motion that is made. You can go to the next slide. This is what was attached to the agenda regarding kind of the rules of how that process works. So, okay, I think we're good there. Take some time to look through those. If you've already looked through them, good. This is essentially saying you can nominate yourself. Nobody has to second your self-nomination. You can nominate anybody. Once we close all of those, then we move forward on the vote for that one specific role, repeat and do the next for the same. So I'd like your input on this in terms of whether or not we do this tonight or if we continue it. And if we do decide to continue it, we still would need to temporarily vote in a chair for tonight to handle some of the formalities. One being typically after I present, which we can have Jennifer call for this when I sit down, which is to open up public comment after each staff presentation before you really get into discussion. That way the comment happens and potentially could influence what you say next. So we'll move to that with Jennifer asking for public comment to be opened on this item, and then your discussion can continue.
Four one two zero eight seven, you have the floor.
Hi, this is Diane Nielsen. I don't know what 412087 is, but anyhow, I had my hand raised earlier for the just in general public comments. I'm not commenting on this particular item, but I was overlooked the first time. So I just wanted to say I'm happy to see the Environmental Commission meeting again, and I will look forward to supporting you in your efforts. And I'm listening and looking forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We don't have anybody else online in the chamber. We're closing public comment.
Yeah, this is for you to discuss the item because as it was agendized was for the vote to happen, for the elections to happen. So you can give your discussion and potentially make a motion on continuing the item or a motion on and go through the election process, which we can keep that slide up for your reference if that's what you choose to do. Otherwise, it could be a motion to continue item 6A to the next regularly scheduled meeting and then to discuss who we might temporarily elect for this meeting to act as chair.
I was just gonna suggest that maybe we take this meeting to get to know each other a little bit more through discussion and move this to the next meeting to vote on. And then also hopefully we cover the commissioner. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I was gonna suggest, since we have to have a chair for this meeting temporarily, is my understanding, to find out if someone's interested in sharing temporarily just for tonight, so that we can wait till next time and still be within the process we're supposed to follow. So
My only other idea is that I don't know about our other fellow commissioner, but we only have Emily, who has been on the commission before. I was going to vote for you to be chair as a default, someone who has experience with it.
I'd be happy to serve as chair for tonight, just temporarily to kind of get us through. Awesome. Yeah, but I'll go. You want to go?
Welcome. So the item that we're on now was the elections, which there was some discussion to briefly fill you in. They wanted to move it to our next meeting, in part because you weren't here, but also time to get to know each other through this meeting and through discussions. So the item's still pending. What we do need is for somebody to make an official motion, for that motion to be seconded, and then for a vote to happen. And we'll have Jennifer do a roll call vote because it is concerning a temporary potential election of somebody to the chair role tonight, just to get through the formalities of the meeting.
I make a motion to not only serve as the chair for tonight. Can I put those two together? And for us to have 6A taken up next meeting in October.
I second.
So roll call vote, Jennifer, please. Each of their names.
Yeah.
And yes or no?
Commissioner Kuivenfar,
Yes.
Commissioner Kennard,
Yes.
Commissioner Gottlieb,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan.
Yes.
Right, and if we can read in the next item, 6B, Emily, and we'll move forward through the meeting. And after staff presents, open up for public comment and continue with your discussions. Thank you.
All right, item 6B, business item, overview of the 2025-2026 City Council Strategic Plan.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Eric Azriel, Associate Planner, and I'm going to give a very broad background. The Senior Planner Beth Rocha will be going into much more detail, but I'm just going to give you the broad outline of what we're talking about when we say the strategic plan. The next slide, please. Oh, that's it. So the strategic plan is typically done once every year or every other year, and it outlines the goals for the city, what the city council wants staff and commissions to work on. The most recent strategic plan comes from this year, and it goes for 2025 to 2026. And it's split up into a series of pillars and then goals and policies and ways to get there. But we're going to start with talking about the pillars. Next slide, please. So these are the 5 pillars. And they are fairly broad. I'm going to read through them in case this is the first time you're seeing them. We have the first one is Pillar 1, effective, accessible governance. The second is vibrant local economy, diverse and inclusive community, enhanced physical infrastructure and abundant water supply, and community safety and quality of life. These are pillars that came from the 2023 strategic plan, which covered 2023 and 2024, and they were carried forward in 2025. City Council said these were good pillars. And next slide. This slide shows the different ways that these pillars can be enacted. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just for some examples, some of the pillars will require public engagement. Some of them will require capital funds. Some do require external collaboration. There are a lot of different methods in which these are acted upon. Next slide, please. So, this is a little bit too small to read. The full attachment is in the staff report as attachment 1. The point of this is more to show you where we're starting. We are going to zoom in onto one of these a little bit more. So this is the 4th pillar, which has some materials directly related to the Environmental Commission, which is why we're bringing it up. I'm going to see if I can point. Nope, I don't have a pointer. So let's just go to the next slide, please. Oh, it's not there. Go back up. I'm just going to point out where it is. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see how do we achieve these goals? And there are a series of vertical text. That text is talking about which department at the city has some impact or has the ability to implement some of this. Next slide. So here we are really looking at environmental, activities. And one of the big things that we have, again, a little small to read, but it says adopt and integrate recommendations from the Climate Action Plan. So the Climate Action Plan was recently adopted. And one of the things that the Environmental Commission can do is look at ways to implement it. Beth is going to go into much more detail on this matter. This is just the broad overview. And I believe that concludes item B's presentation.
They're opening it up for public comment.
Item 6.
Opening item 6B for public comment. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 from a phone. Diane, you now have the floor.
Thank you. I just have one comment. Could you please use your microphones when you are speaking? Otherwise, I can't hear you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We have no other comments.
Yeah, questions or discussion.
Yeah, so just opening it up for discussion or? We're just opening it up now for discussion amongst the commissioners, so discussion or questions about that item or?
It possibly sounds like maybe you have your mics on, maybe let's do a test, hold the button down, test out something. Because I think you might have to have it passively held. Just tap it a couple times.
If the light's on, is it working?
And tap it, honestly. Tap the light, test it.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay, so my light's on.
Right, just need to be close. Yeah, I think it is. There we go. Thank you.
Thanks to Diane for coaching us.
Yeah, one question that came up for me as I was looking through the strategic plan, just from the staff input, kind of, besides sort of the obvious places like item 4.3 and 4.4, as you mentioned, where we might have intersection as a commission. I was wondering if there were other items that you all saw on the strategic plan that where like our inputting or engagement might be of use.
I'd have to look at it closer. I was looking at it specifically for the climate action plan. One item that may have been in there that wasn't as direct as the line item that was in there from the purple section was probably something involving urban forestry or trees, which is something that is a specific action item in the climate action plan. So we will touch on it. The intent was just to call out the broader category of implementing measures from the climate action plan as being identified in the strategic plan, not necessarily giving you every single line item, but that's why it was there as an attachment for a closer read, given that we're not aware of, outside of the two existing members and we haven't met for a while, what your awareness is of how the city kind of functions and where some of these goals and policies are coming from. So it was shared more on that broader level.
I do know that pillar 3.3, we can the civic engagement, especially with youth, because I know our climate action plan has a lot of youth oriented towards the end with getting the youth involved. So I feel like we can touch on that part too.
Yeah, that one stood out for me as well as I was reading through, and in a similar vein, item 2.3, which was about advancing workforce development. And I know that, you know, in thinking about like youth engagement and climate implementation, that could be kind of a pillar of that too, is sort of workforce development for young people in our city. But yeah.
And one of the thoughts I had when I was reviewing the strategic plan is how some places it seems really obvious because it's talking about sustainability. Other places it's less obvious, but I think climate and environmental concerns are always part of all of these things, which is one of the things that I think that's our job in general. But I feel like no matter what the priorities of the city or the city council or any of the groups we're working with are, there's ways for us to make sure that we're looking at sustainability and greening every proposal as much as possible. So it's exciting to see how much was already represented in the strategic plan that the climate adaptation plan is now either emphasizing or lifting up or intersecting with. So that was exciting to see.
I have actually a question, just to clarify, because I remember one of the goals of this plan was to make our community like look better and nicer. So one of them was like for sure making it more green, as you know, a lot of you mentioned. But I wonder if any any point about like the trash and so the littering is a problem in our community is something that is actually considered in this so and just like kind of like a broader question is like how the environmental commission can help like reduce the amount of like litter and trash in our community. It is actually one of the is in fact like I think one of the every like environmentalist or someone who is concerned about the environment is like so I mean everyone's concerned. But I wonder if this is part of it or how environmental commission can help.
Sure. I mean, I'll start by giving you some background on maybe work that was done by the former commission, which was in part done through ordinance amendment of some of the older plastic bag regulations, as well as single-use plastics, limiting those more and shifting towards more compostables. So when that work was done, and it still is currently a contract, the city initiated a contract with Environmental Innovations, who does education and outreach. Their focus was with the businesses, but also a requirement of that code was litter pickup around certain businesses that generated a lot of waste. For example, a cannabis business has people walking out and opening up things as they're on their way, and they're just dropping their plastic trash on the street. I think we've all seen that type of waste around. So that work was done. Environmental Innovations continued that work and has had, I think, 3 contract agreements with the city. Their current one is either at $10,000 or $15,000. That is being managed by a staff in the engineering department to work with them on probably their final push of outreach in the community. And that individual deals a lot with SB 1383 and the compostable requirements of commercial businesses in the city. So there's layers of how this is working and how it has worked as we take on these different phases of implementing some of the measures from the Climate Action Plan. That's not to say that the Environmental Commission couldn't try to do another push on the ground level as you bring forth ideas to me for potentially items to be included on an upcoming agenda, which always have to be okayed from the top down. So if you give me an agenda item idea, I can discuss it. It doesn't mean that it will necessarily end up on the agenda, just in terms of how the process works, because we do have our primary goals of implementing some of the climate action plan and keeping your focus on some of those items for a while. But work has been done. Work is being done in other departments as we speak. That work continues and is always a challenge. The fact that we can say we have the Monterey Bay Sanctuary outside and this is where everything flows down to is just the level of awareness that maybe some people don't have in terms of the value of what we live next to. So as much as we can try to include very specific things like that, even if there are some looser items in the strategic plan that you think might be related to it, oftentimes those items are being worked on in some way by somebody, even if it's not largely publicized.
It also strikes me that later in the agenda, we're talking about the Neighborhood Improvement Commission's call, and that this is a place that overlaps with that. Because a lot of the things they're focused on, or at least my interpretation, are very much what you're talking about. So we may be able to talk about it at that point as well.
Question, does this include, the parks as well? Any kind of parks that we have?
Are you asking if the strategic plan includes elements related
Yes,
to
yeah.
parks? It does. And also in this past year, council adopted a parks master plan. So if you haven't familiarized yourself with that, do a website search and I'm pretty certain that has been made up to date. And you can see what the long range plan is for parks in the city. So item 6B didn't have a vote on it. It was informational. If you want to let me know whether or not we're ready to move on to item 6C and have Emily read that in so we can continue. Let's do that. Can you recenter it? Can you recenter it for me? Recenter it. Thanks. This it says web layout. No, don't do that. Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
So business item 6B, discuss and provide feedback on the proposed phase 1 implementation measures of the climate action and adaptation plan.
So 6C. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on why we're discussing a climate action plan in large part is because our climate action plan was approved by the city council on June 5th. That was after probably a little bit less than a year and a half of planning staff working with a consultant that we hired and doing outreach and mailings and everything you can think of to get input on the plan. Posted everything as we needed to in terms of things on the website at various stages of the reviews. And yeah, it was great working with them in terms of them bringing kind of a different perspective to things, but also in tailoring it for Seaside based on a lot of comments that we got back on the plan. Next slide, please. So within the plan, which the link is active and live on the website, you click on kind of the front page of it and it opens up the full plan for you. Within that document, though, it breaks down both climate mitigation strategies and climate adaptation strategies. There's 42 mitigation strategies and there's 39 adaptation strategies. And from there, that's the work that we have to start implementing. And we're going to be implementing that work as the years go on. So we'll get to a next subsequent slide where you'll see a table and I'll go into a bit more detail on how that was developed. But essentially, with those strategies or items, there's an outlined process in the plan as well, which is starting at step 1 for the feasibility studies. And community development or planning staff is responsible for pushing this through. Whereas once it gets to a certain stage, then other departments carry it through. So where we're at now is that we're engaging with other city departments. We're engaging with the commission to try to get input on what strategies we're going to implement, as well as the resources that are needed. Next slide. And if there's any questions on that between slides, I'll say next slide. You can ask then if you have a question on what's been covered. So step 2 will either go into, if it's a larger initiative that we're undertaking, a pilot program, or potentially initial implementation if it's something that is relatively easy to implement, like the providing of information, or maybe a program exists to like 60% of being there and we push it through the other 40% to have it really count towards what we're trying to achieve. So we develop and take time to develop what this looks like for the phase one. There's going to be back and forth. Ultimately, whatever we work on and what we suggest for phase one, we have to take to the council for approval. At that point, council is saying, yes, you can continue with essentially expending staff resources on this. You have our support. And then we do the implementation of step 3 and the long-term adaptation. And at that point, if it is going into full implementation, then the respective department who's responsible for it would take it over from planning as we start working on developing phase 2. And it's going to be this kind of constant cycle of reviewing, implementing, getting approvals, going back and forth again to cycle through a huge number of implementation measures on both the adaptation and strategy side. Next slide. And questions, if any?
Years of
Climate action plan has some specific goals in there, like there's certain state mandated goals, like by 2035, you have to achieve this or that. Otherwise, most long range planning documents span 20 to 30 years. So there's a lot of time, and there's also a lot of time that has passed that we have not implemented anything. So hopefully this is going to be the start of something that stays steady and continues to have council support for things that do need spending allocated towards them. So this is what I'm working from, which is just a workbook that I took all of the measures in the climate action plan and kind of divided them into what is required of us, like how do we accomplish this? And some of the categories that I came up with, a lot of them are city initiatives. Anything that's a city initiative, just like all of these items, are going to need council level support. Some of them are city code amendments, which if it falls into a few chapters for us, we're going to handle it. It could fall into, for example, chapter 8, which engineering might handle. And then resource sharing is one of the other categories that a lot of these fell into, and that means us sharing information with the public, because oftentimes your first and best outreach to happen about how you do or achieve things is by informing people of their options or choices, or even in some cases, how to make things more affordable to be more green with the projects that they're doing. These were also split up by department. And again, that is the department that will ultimately be responsible once it has the green light from council and the program essentially packet or implementation methods are handed over by planning staff. So from this document, if we can go to the next slide, we started thinking about what could be in phase 1. And of course, always thinking about what staffing resources are necessary. Some departments have been short-staffed for a while, and putting extra work on them in some cases is not feasible dependent on what their kind of current large project workload is. So that was taken into consideration. I also thought about our various points of interactions that we have for how we can share information with the public. To start a new business in Seaside, you could potentially have a business license required, or you could have a discretionary permit required, a building permit required, a sign permit required, and your business license required. So if you think about the number of times and applications in departments, somebody is coming in to do something in the city, there's multiple points of opportunity for contact and then sharing information. I briefly touched on earlier the existing programs and potential modifications to make to those. We'll see that on a tree planting item. If something exists and maybe there's just a little bit that we have to modify or tweak to fit it to the climate action plan, that represents a good item because we potentially have a couple years of evidence of success or just data on that and how we can modify it moving forward with your input. Implementation demands, this also falls on that first one about staffing resources, but also financially. And the last item is budget. What's going to be the cost of even doing something that maybe comes across as simple from a quick glance versus when you dig down into it, what are you actually talking about? So with all of those and with a lot of discussion with management, we landed on some items, and if we can go to the next slide, what we're looking at potentially for phase one, and this first slide are 4 items. These 4 are somewhat related in the sense that, yeah, they all involve water conservation in some way. They all involve something that's relatively easy to do, which is the finding of resources to provide to people. Primarily the types of permits that we see in Seaside, which is largely a residential community, are residential permits, whether that be a remodel, addition, new ADUs or junior ADUs. There's a lot of residential permit processing happening. The first one, water efficient appliances and fixtures. Monterey Peninsula Water Management District also has input on what needs to be done with this, but they also have a rebate program. Right now, if we require that somebody do something in order to build their ADU, we're not necessarily connecting them with MPWMD and how to get rebates for what they're doing. That's one point of opportunity. The gray water reuse systems can be a bit more complex in terms of what can and can't be done with a building permit or without another type of permit. Looking at the ease of implementation on that one and searching for resources that make it essentially homeowner friendly and maybe not something that requires a lot of extra cost on their side. And the same with the last 2 in terms of drought tolerant landscaping and then a residential turf replacement program, which already exists with MPWMD, and the efforts of connecting and seeing what of MPWMD's rebate programs we can maybe start to get people to capitalize on would also be looking at their past years' data sets of how many people actually applied for this from Seaside, and then looking after maybe a year of implementation, those numbers that we see change. Next slide and questions, if any.
I do have a question.
Sure.
I know in our cap it said to, or one of the priorities would be given to high priority and near term.
Right.
But I know we're also kind of starting with a lot of medium midterm ones.
Right.
I was just wondering, was there any particular, is that going back to the money wise and staff wise?
A lot of it has to do with that at this time, definitely. I don't know if you paid attention to our last budget hearings or sessions with council, but things were tight and had to be moved around and some positions were cut as well. So this first phase is definitely taking that into consideration and not picking a high ticket item, even though it might be high priority, and kind of looking at where we could easily capture some movement. So the next few slides for each of the items,
I have
sorry.
a question. Yeah, so my question is, so I understand about the budget considerations and looking at the numbers that have been allocated, but I'm always looking, especially when it comes to climate, is the pace of climate change is faster than the pace of bureaucracy, and I'm part of bureaucracy. So this is not a criticism on anyone in the room. This is my observation, and my concern is how do we factor in, and how does the city generally factor in the cost of an inaction or delay when down the road doing some things may cost a lot more if we haven't done things now. So I know it's a bigger question than just this, but for me, it's one of the things that I want to figure out. How do we make recommendations that understand how the city's operating now, especially given the limits that the city
Mhm.
has. And I
Mhm.
know staffing is a big issue. We're a
Mhm.
small town, and we really are in many ways. And so I want to make sure what we do and put our energy into is something that isn't just going to be experienced as a slap in the face, or also just not have any wings to fly. And I'm just curious about.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is all of that is very valid. Part of how we're going to move things through this commission means that anything put on an agenda and anything done regarding the climate action plan isn't a sole decision of you, it's a decision of the decision-making body, which is the council. And ultimately, you can ask me, how did I land on these? And I could tell you about the X number of meetings that I had and discussions that we had to get to these items. In terms of, though, whether or not things get shot down, it's also the idea that everybody might not be on the same page with their level of awareness on the things that maybe you are, that you can impart in various ways by becoming more involved beyond, the 2 hours that we might be here for a month. Whether or not you choose to become involved in other public meetings, just like at the beginning of every public hearing, they open it up for comments not related to items on the agenda, which means you can show up to any meeting you want and use that to say whatever you want. Also, there's strategy to that, should you choose to engage in that way. What I've seen other members of commissions do when they go to make a comment, they clearly state, my name is, and I'm a member of, but I'm speaking tonight as a citizen of this community or a resident of this community, or whatever term you want to use to identify yourself. So there's ways to share information, to share knowledge, to potentially influence the thoughts of those maybe making decisions or on other commissions, that it can become more of a topic of conversation.
Thank you very much.
So continuing in terms of each of these items, from the 4 kind of water conserving items, what we did is look through to see what are the resources. I already mentioned MPWMD. This is a simple rebate form that they have. And yeah, they have rules for what has to be upgraded. We have rules for what you can and can't put into an ADU. But again, we don't know if that connection is being made on their side. But what we can do up front as staff here, when somebody even asks us a question of like, I think I want to build an ADU, or somebody who comes in thinking that they got their plans approved or designed by an architect and everything's good to go, and they're like, here's my submittal, take my money. It's like, what decisions can still be influenced at that point? Rebates are one thing. You're going to have to do it. Maybe you want something back in return. Maybe your motivator for doing that is purely monetary. Maybe you think you're doing it to conserve water and be better for the environment. Either way, what we're looking at for this one, and if we can go to the next slide, and the subsequent 2 that follow after that, is essentially information providing to people at various stages from general inquiry to submittal to permit being reviewed. Gray water systems, I found this from a water district, and it provides on this page kind of a visual flow of how you can set up your own gray water system from your clothes washer. And then the subsequent page, which I didn't include because it's way too small, included like a parts purchasing list. And, us bringing this up here as a potential for something we can include in a handout to the public also needs to be looked at by our building official to say whether or not any other permit's going to be needed, because the last thing we want to do is create a burden potentially. Even though it's not a requirement, it could still be viewed in that way, that I got this from the city and this is with my packet on my permit. What do I need to do about this? So the outreach component of that is critical, that this is informational and connected to our goals in our climate action plan. Next slide, please. Yeah, those conversions are interesting. Central Coast Low Water Impact Initiative is a great resource that I came across. This has to do with drought tolerant landscaping in new developments. provides, and this is just a snippet because it's not meant to be comprehensive in terms of what they provided, was at least 5 pages long of various drought tolerant plants, some of them native, some of them not, as to what you can plant to be not so water dependent in your area, or if it is put in an area where, let's say, you have your roof runoff going towards and gathering, that it can sustain that type of environment of being submerged for a longer period of time. So this is another potential resource that we're looking to provide when projects are required to do certain things with a grading permit. Next slide. And as earlier mentioned, through both CalM and MPWMD, the Residential Turf Replacement Program, some of those rules are outlined in there. Definitely not worth going into detail unless you have a lawn at your home right now that has been actively watered for a while. That is one of their requirements, is they have to verify that you've actually been spending money or putting that towards a lawn. But that is something where we do see people proposing that. We also have our municipal code, which has pretty extensive landscaping regulations as well as limitations in lawns not being put in spots that are too narrow or not of a certain area. So those are the items that we came up with for part of phase 1. They were grouped together in terms of being connected to water. We'll move to the next slide, which is another group of just 2, and I'll take questions if anybody has them now. So continuing on, one of these is new. One of these exists in a program already. UGT 1 and UGT 5, tree planting. The goal is to increase our urban canopy by 5,000 trees across public spaces and in residential areas by 2040. There's a year for you in terms of the goal set out for that. That's high and long term. And it says to be implemented by Public Works and Recreation because they deal with the right of way and they deal with parks. The other item below that, community tree adoption program, that program has existed in some form in terms of providing training and either fruit and or native trees to residents of Seaside. And if we can go to the next slide, there's just a little bit more detail on that in terms of the tree planting item, which is the new one. The council in this budget session allocated $4,500 to FOSPA for purchasing and planting native trees in FOSPA stewarded parks. If you're unaware of who FOSPA is, it's the Friends of Seaside Parks Association. They're a nonprofit who has been involved in park maintenance in the city for a long time. Every Saturday from 10 to noon, a large group of volunteers for FOSPA meet up at various city parks, and you can check out their website for that calendar. I believe this Saturday is actually at Capra Park, which is a park that I steward, and I think one of our commissioners also resides near there, and there's a community garden there.
And there's a mural there.
Yes, the sunflower
Terrific
mural.
I do have a question.
Sure.
For the tree planting, the increasing the coverage.
Right.
Does that number include the numbers for the tree covers that was taken away due to the campus town development?
There's a requirement, I believe, in that permit for them to replace them. So that's separate because it's tied to a permit. If their permit doesn't go through to certain stages, then maybe, who knows what happens. Removals associated with the different phases of that project too. And I would have to follow up with you if you want an answer to that on if the city's identified spaces for that yet. And then back, again, touching on the community tree adoption program, it launched 2 years ago. Last year, 75 trees, whether fruit or native, were given to residents. And again, the council budgeted 5,000 towards that for this year. The FOSPA money that was allocated to them also happened, I believe, a few years ago, and we were able to get 30 odd trees into FOSPA managed parks. One thing to think about is that there's parks that FOSPA doesn't manage, but still represent opportunities for tree planting. Our next item is regarding the Neighborhood Improvement Commission, and opportunities for suggesting projects and funding for things through them. And then a quick note that the Environmental Commission, I believe, has a budget of $3,500. So there's money to be spent that can make an impact. And on to the next slide. I think that might be the end. Yeah, so we can scroll back up just one, just so we keep it on this. So if you guys have any more questions, I'll take them. If not, we'll open that up for public comment. What I am, of course, open to on this item, because it's a lot of information, both for us to come up with and also for you to digest, is that you think about the items that you have seen tonight that we've identified. We can share the PowerPoint later via email. That way you can zoom in and see things in more detail. And emailing is always an option for input to me, as opposed to the short time we have here and trying to condense so much into a little bit of time. Any questions?
I did have a question. One thing that I know doesn't come as an initial understanding for me is how money intensive some of the decisions are. And I know a lot of our strategies include zoning policy changes and building standards. Those seem like to me easy things to implement that shouldn't cost money, but I'm not sure.
Sure.
And I wasn't sure if there's do building standards go through different departments than zoning policies?
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit. California Building Code, and then via every city in California, they have to update their code, I believe, on a 4-year cycle. We're coming up on one now. What you'll see potentially, though, and that we have seen that influences even some of the items that we have here for building, is the state saying, we're hitting a pause button on this. You actually can't adopt anything related to this.
Gotcha.
For example, like the fires that happened down in LA, they're like, how are we going to get permits and rebuild all these homes? And part of that is not making the standards more difficult. So they're hitting a pause button on us implementing certain things through the building code update. Building code update, that goes straight to council because it's not in Title 17, which is the zoning ordinance. That flows a bit differently. There's 2 readings, your first reading of council and then a second reading at the subsequent meeting. For most code amendments, you're also looking at 2 council meetings. If it's a code amendment that falls into the zoning code, there's going to be a hearing of the planning commission followed by those 2 standard council hearings. So the direction to amend those comes from council and the city manager. And then that direction goes down to staff. And the time to draft those depends on the urgency of the item. Some of you, if you're paying attention, might have seen a firearms discussion come up recently in terms of limiting where retail firearms are allowed in the city. There are probably way more meetings about that than what were public in terms of refining the code and being exact in the language that we use. So an item like that, which was definitely passed through at a faster pace than some things, like I have a zoning code amendment that I've been working on for ages because it's not just one section. It's all of these sections that cause us to trip up or contradictions within itself. So it's a matter of using it and getting to the point where you're like, yes, we're confident we can make this change. So the urgency of it is driven outside of staff and more by upper management. And yeah, some of the processing of it, once it hits your first hearing, you could be looking at just going through the hearing process of, let's say, 3 meetings, a planning commission, council, and council, depending on how the calendar falls. You could be talking about a month and a half at bare minimum. And then the time after it actually gets approved, there's a period of sometimes 30 or 60 days for it to actually become effective. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
All right.
I have a question about code amendments. How common is it and has it been in Seaside for citizens to put a code amendment on the ballot? Or has that ever been done in Seaside? Because I know that happens.
I can't recall. The Environmental Commission brought through code amendments with staff as directed by management. Otherwise, yeah, I haven't seen that happen. I don't think.
I do have so for an example, like the BLD1 strategy, that's just building energy performance standards. It just says most green current building standards.
Right.
It's kind of a general, and we kind of decide on like the implementation of that. But would we just propose, hey, this is what we want to work on, and then who ultimately decides like what green standards we try to meet or change to?
That's more of a conversation with planning saying we want to meet, let's just say there's 5 in the document related to building. We set up meetings with the building official if we're given the green light to even touch that item to begin with. Building official informs what we can. We come back with an idea of like internally what staff says. You have room for input. Open it up to public input and further refine. Because like I said, there might be something that just didn't cross our minds, even though we're the professional staff here. Sometimes there's something new that you saw, let's just say in a bigger city that they were able to get through and you're questioning whether or not it's possible here.
So for the kind of, I guess, procedure going forward is they want us to submit like 3 to 5 strategies per year to work on, but that's 3 to 5 like approved strategies that will be worked on and like we actually get the green light for.
Yeah, I mean, that ultimately is the council's decision, right? If one of my goals as a staff person is to bring forward, let's just say 5 of these strategies, I might not even be able to implement one if council says no to every one of them. But you're also writing on the expectation that council approved the climate action plan and therefore is supportive of seeing these things implemented. Whether or not they're going to want to spend some of the money associated with some in a certain quarter or even fiscal year is a whole other discussion.
And then for the, I guess, examples of the ones that y'all have already identified.
Right.
Are those currently what's going forward? Or is
That's
there
currently,
to discuss?
sorry.
No.
Yeah, that's currently what we're seeking input from you on. If you know of other resources that we can be handing out to people, if you have ideas on potentially how we can maybe modify some of the tree planting, or even when we'll get to the next item, asking, let's just say the NIC for money for trees in non-FOSPA sponsored parks. Those are all possibilities. And like I said, my email is open. So even though we meet once a month, I'm expecting there to be active and open dialogue between all of us as these ideas are being shared with you. So you can provide input on your own time as you've had time to digest everything a little bit more. So I think that's all of our questions on this item. If we can open this up for public comment, and then if you have further discussion on it, or we can continue to 6D. Thank you.
Okay, so we're opening up business item 6C for public comment.
Members on Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 from a phone. Diane, you are ready to make your comment.
Thank you, Diane Nielsen again. I am a tree advocate, and I am hoping with our previous programs that we've implemented over the past 5 or 6 years, like planting trees in parks, and having the free tree giveaway program for citizens every year, that we can expand on that and include trees, for instance, in parks that don't have stewards and on open spaces that the city has available, and more. So to increase the impact of the trees in our city for environmental reasons, for beauty, for peace, um, for what is the word? For well-being, sense of well-being in the community, for property values, but mostly for health and the ground we live on, basically, in keeping drought at bay with having trees over the tops of with shade and such. And more than that, and obviously that takes money and it takes staff. And one of the issues is having enough parks staff in public works to help grow these trees and care for them in their first years so they have a chance of surviving and providing more tree coverage and eliminating heat islands and erosion and that sort of thing. And one of the things I know I'll be advocating for is for more park staff with the knowledge of how to take care of trees or just be able to water them on a regular basis until they're established. And I'm urging your commission to do that. And I would do that as a citizen, and you could do it as a citizen also. That's pretty much what I want to point out at this point is that we do need more park staff. For over 7 years that I've been involved, we've been short-staffed in that area. It would make a big difference to our city and our greening of our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. There are no more comments.
Okay, so moving on to the discussion portion for, for item 6C. About the public comments and just. About the item itself or the comments.
Okay. I totally agree. Thank you for the comment of the public. I think I totally agree that it seems like we're short of staff for like maintaining, the parks in our community. Like I myself is a California State Park, volunteer, and I do believe that if we can somehow collaborate, with those volunteers at the, for instance, the parks or in general, those can be good like resources to fill up the gap, that we have, and also it was like raised by the citizen. So I do believe that not only we need more parks, but also just maintaining the current, parks that we have. So the best example, I think the Laguna Grande Park is on the other side of the street. So unfortunately, it's just like the condition is sometimes like it's very poor, and so either like with trash or the trees, need like maintenance. So I feel like I'm collaborating with those like volunteers that the California State Park has might be an option. So.
Yeah, I think, thanks Beth too for putting together such a really comprehensive look at the climate action plan too and how the different ways it can get implemented. It's really helpful to think about rebates and rebate programs too and kind of that yeah, that like point of contact with the public. And so I just want to put this out there to the commission that I think it might be helpful for me to kind of like look at some of the rebate programs that exist, some of the ones that Beth mentioned, but also maybe looking at similarly sized cities and rebate programs that exist there. And maybe that's something that we could take a look at as a commission to kind of bring stuff forward to our to our city council too. Yeah, those, just thinking about rebates.
I can touch on that as well because this year I bought an EV car, and looking into what companies provide rebates and stuff is very convoluted because you don't know necessarily what all, like there's PG&E, 3CE, just the state in general. And so one of my ideas kind of was kind of how Beth and they grouped our strategies together by how they could be achieved. I kind of was doing it of like all the all ones that touch on incentives, rebates, or public outreach, etc. And so like I think combining those into like a single website for rebates of all the local companies and stuff that are available, I think would be a good way of touching on a lot of those strategies at once.
A thought I have coming off of what you're all saying is there are some organizations already organizing in our county with members who are commissioners, but also people who live in Seaside and may not come to this meeting. Like, thank you for coming to this meeting and to tying in as well. And I think some of those have been, a lot of what I've been hearing in those meetings, the ones I've attended, has been, how do we get the word out about electrification, rebates, incentives, state, federal, what are all the changes, and keeping up with that, as you said, is really difficult. And so if there are people who are already organizing that, then we can convey that out to Seaside citizens in particular, rather than reinvent the wheel. But I really appreciate your suggestion, Emily, about looking at what other cities of our size, similar budget, et cetera, have been doing, because there's no need for us to be reinventing the wheel. There's a long list. Our plan is tailored for our city, but there are ways of implementing the things that are in our plan that other cities may have already done. And so I think that's a great way to really not reinvent the wheel, but also help us move as fast as we need to, because I'm sure we'll all feel like we're not moving fast enough a lot of the time because the scale of the problems we're facing is so big. But I really like this idea of piggybacking on, pulling in, and then figuring out how to help people see that it costs less to do these things than it does to not do these things. And I think it talks about that in the plan, that it's how much you can save by electrifying your home, for example. But it seems out of reach for a lot of people, and sometimes it is. And then there's a whole issue of multi-family dwellings, and that's a whole other kettle of fish with electrification. But I'd really like to see us focus when we're doing what we're doing on really being a conduit and sharing, as you said, sharing information with other commissions, but with the city council in particular, about what other cities have done that's been successful when they have a limited budget and staff restraints.
I wanted to just to touch on, I wasn't sure like going into this if we were going to be like proposing our own ideas from the strategies which we should try to prioritize. But Beth mentioned something about awareness being one of the main things. And that just got me thinking more about the youth action part of it, which could be implemented in a lot of different ways with volunteers or working with the schools and stuff. And I feel like could be a cheaper way of being able to implement and get more awareness out there to the public rather than just flyers and something like that. And then also I had just one other thing is like, I wasn't sure because some of the ideas already mentioned were established projects like the tree planting. Like I'm a fan of tree planting and I want to do that, but since it's already an established thing, I wasn't sure how much of a priority that should be in our like the strategies that we push forward, because I feel like we should add things onto it, not just, it feels like an easy way of just addressing what we're already doing instead of adding on to it to do more. Yeah.
One thing that I think we are in still in 6C, or we're just like, okay. This is something like a potential, you know, kind of like project ideas. It just, kind of like related to the, because we talked about, you know, like tree and, so sustainable kind of like development. And I also in line with like what you said, Commissioner, about the school, you know, kind of like outreach. I was actually thinking of, so maybe, like, having some like days of the year that they call them like tree planting, and just kind of like specifically focusing on schools, you know, and like their parents and also like other citizens. So just to raise awareness, you know, and like the community, and also involving in our schools. Like I think like a annual kind of like day planting, you know, kind of sorry, tree planting, you know, kind of like day. That is like the main focus is just like schools. I think that's one thing I just.
And I was just wondering if we wanted to say, have a discussion of like bringing up our own ideas from the strategies, like a list of like 3 or 5 that we each want to try to implement in the next year or so, or say, or just move forward with the options that they have already provided. Can we bring that to like another meeting to discuss further? How would that work?
At the end of every meeting, there's a reports from staff, which are just maybe something happens at a council meeting that I want you to know about. There's also a reports from commissioners, which could be you sharing, over the past month since we last met, I've been in communications with our staff liaison. I also dug into this. This is what I found out. So that's your opportunity to do it at that time. If we want it on as an agenda item, I'd be working with the chair and vice chair and floating that through to see if it's okay to put it on as an agenda item. I would say in general, the focus should be the items that we're going to move forward on. Finding out more information on, like, for example, in the example you gave, the tree planting program. Somebody shows their license that they live in Seaside, they get a tree. Done. Could more happen? Of course, right? So that's what the angle we're looking at it from is, how do we increase this? How do we create those additional connections with the community? There's a lot of room for things to be amplified. So yeah, those are the opportunities for discussing those items. I would say at any time, if you see an item on there that you're excited about or that you started digging into and you want to share your ideas with me, you can do that at any time, because we don't know what will be in phase 2, or if we start planning for phase 2 right on the backside of this because things are maybe looking better in projections and we know that we might have more money or resources to dedicate towards it.
I guess maybe to that end, I'm wondering if it would be helpful to get like a little bit more of like an in-depth report at some point on the tree programs. Just kind of like, yeah, what are the processes for those being implemented? Like, or if you can point us to, you know, documentation for that we can take a look at.
Yeah.
In between time. Yeah.
I'll share with you everything that was shared tonight, not just in terms of the PowerPoint, but in terms of the attachments for each item that I found. So I'll probably send those separately just so it's not a big, massive message. That way we can stay focused in our replies in terms of what item we're talking about. But yeah, expect back and forth.
And my other thing is, what is the expected, I guess, time frame of us to be like, yes, these are our 3 to 5 strategies that we're pushing forward now? Like, when are we voting on that to send to the city council?
No, you're advising
Well,
on what we've chosen
okay.
and informing and hopefully pushing it further than what we have at this point. At this point, it's very new, you could say, in terms of it being discussed publicly for the first time, right? So like I said about the process, it's going to be pretty cyclical. After tonight's meeting, we'll probably have a meeting internally with the other departments that implement these things just to see where they're at in terms of, okay, if this is our projected schedule to have these to the council before the new year, what do you see for yourself January moving forward, right? So it's juggling a lot of communications and different points of input.
Thank you.
The sense I get is we're gonna be, as a commission, we're in our, maybe it's not the honeymoon even yet, but this is the beginning. It's a new experience for all of us. And then we're gonna be thinking about things that are gonna take much longer than our terms, but we're also gonna be needing to do things that are rapid. And so I'm getting the sense there's gonna be movement on different levels and then we have to fit all of that in with the cycle of the city and then what's happening in the community. So I'm getting really curious now about what are some of the things you'd like us to be focused on that might not have been on this list. And I'm curious about that from my fellow commissioners all across the board. So I do think it might make sense for us to have conversations about that at future meetings so that we can get a better sense of, so how do we then influence effectively what might happen next year and the year beyond that?
Any more comments on this item specifically? All right, I think we're gonna move on then. So the next item is business item 6D, discuss potential project ideas to suggest to the Neighborhood Improvement Commission.
We can go to the next one too. Next slide. It's just the intro. There's a letter shared, which is on the right, by our assistant city manager, who I think historically has worked with the Neighborhood Improvement Commission. It's essentially sent out to all staff liaisons, maybe to all staff, I don't recall. And it is letting the community know that the Neighborhood Improvement Commission is starting their outreach period to gather kind of project ideas for what should be happening with the money that they receive from the transient occupancy tax, mostly related to Airbnbs in the city. This year, the council allocated a portion of that based on their projections, I believe at around $195,000, which was lowered significantly from the year prior. So the way this process works is that the NIC is going to ask for submissions to be made to them by November 7th. And then they do have a meeting at the Oldemeyer Center on November 15th, in which, of course, again, public comment can be provided. The idea in them getting input is that they'll receive input from potentially all levels and across the city and from the community. In the staff report, there was an example of what kind of was proposed for council to consider last time around. And I'm just going to make this up, but it could be that the Park and Rec Commission recommended the electronic message board sign, maybe to announce certain events happening at the city. Ultimately, did the council think it was prudent of them to spend, let's just say $15,000 on that item? They didn't. But some of those items are coming through from commissioners who represent the city at that level. And they're giving that idea to the NIC saying, hey, we've talked about this a few times. We think this would be a great idea. Again, just like with implementation of the cap, council has the ultimate say as to what city staff actually does or how the money gets spent. So the recommended projects are then submitted to city staff where they look at feasibility. That means looking at the cost of what this will actually do to the budget. And then those go before the city council for them to provide direction or to straight up approve something, or oftentimes they'll kind of juggle the recommended budgets and costs by either increasing one or reducing another. and kind of fine tune and massage that as they have the discussion over whether or not there's consensus with them on what these recommendations have been. So that's open for a while, as you think about maybe some of the things that are being suggested in the climate action plan implementation measures. Maybe there will be an item from there that you want to suggest. It doesn't have to be a formal suggestion here at these meetings through us. Again, community members, commissioners, two hats you're wearing. You can feel free to email suggestions to the contact provided there. Again, in the packet and electronically, you have the full version of this. So legibility is a bit better than what you see on the screen here tonight. And yeah, reach out if you want me to forward anything in the correct direction. And also, it's good to be aware of when other commissions meet. You can be involved in early discussions and potentially make yourself known if you care to become involved in that level versus kind of showing up last minute and maybe asking for a bigger ticket item. Any questions on that? Okay, I'm gonna take a seat.
Public comments. So just opening that up for business item D. Sorry, 6D for any public comments.
Hi, Juliana Fiala. This is a little bit more toward the last 6C. And I'm sorry because I don't have a solution. I just have a problem. But I think it's something that nobody mentioned that I think is something pretty interesting to think about. When I came to the neighborhood improvement meeting, somebody told me that 66% of the residents of Seaside are renters. And so I'm sitting here thinking about all these beautiful rebates. And if I'm a property owner, why would I invest the money in getting this more efficient thing if my renter is going to be paying the utility bills? I don't care. And also just the general, like people who rent, as somebody who rented up until last year, like I just didn't care as much. And so how do we bridge that gap between like property owners and renters and still being able to reach out to them and still tempting them to do these things like with the rebates and stuff, even though it might not necessarily behoove them in the way that it would in an ideal situation where it's your house and you're the one lowering your rental payment. Anyways, thank you.
Members on Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 from a phone. Commissioners, we don't have any more public comment.
So yeah, I think this is a good kind of brainstorming item here. Yeah, and also as Beth mentioned, right, we don't have to come up with an idea necessarily as a group or today, but yeah, are there any ideas that people want to kind of throw out there to discuss?
I do. So I want to say thank you for bringing that up because that was actually one of my questions for my comments when they originally sent out the cap for us to review. And I was trying to bring it up because they responded to all the comments, but I couldn't bring it up in time. I'm not sure how they responded necessarily, but they did have a response for wording of how to bridge the gap between renters and homeowners because I'm also a renter myself. And looking up ideas for the Neighborhood Improvement Commission. One of the things that I'm still not quite sure how pertinent it is, but one of the municipal codes is that homeowners are required or responsible for maintaining the sidewalk in front of their property. And on the formerly known as, or still known as the C-Click Fix website, there's a lot of requests for sidewalk maintenance and stuff. And I figured that'd be a good kind of how people do like the highway cleanups and stuff like that, do that for, but sidewalk maintenance. Because I know that can also have a big improvement on how a neighborhood looks as well.
I wonder too, as thinking about like replacing impermeable asphalt, if that's something that, if that's like a suggestion, right, where it's like when people need to have sidewalk replaced, that then going forward be replaced with permeable, permeable materials.
I know, and previously I'd asked when there was a public discussion on some websites just members of the community. And I know a lot of residents have problems with or issues with the sidewalks and lack of pedestrian friendly sidewalks throughout Seaside. And I know they're still making improvements for ADA, but I know that's also one of, I can't remember which one of our strategies it was, but making more pedestrian viable sidewalks and stuff. It's not just cleaning it up, but making them more ADA friendly and wider and just all around pedestrian friendly. Not sure if that's necessarily something the neighborhood improvement commission could do, but I know they might be able to, an idea, I guess, is use some of their funds to supplement public works to add more individuals to work on fixing sidewalks, et cetera.
I know a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago now, I was joining some of the Communities for Sustainable Monterey County meetings. And at that time, they were talking about getting some training for folks in that group for how to plant, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but Miyawaki forests, which are these like, supposedly these like, this way to plant like high density forest in a way that it's supposedly like lower maintenance and a way for like forests to kind of like grow up quickly in high density urban areas. So that's something I haven't touched base back again with that group, but something that might be an interesting thing to look at as a project for like one of the areas or park areas that aren't currently maintained by the FOSPA volunteer group. But maybe something that could be like added to the parks staff plate, but maybe would be like a lower lift for the staff folks. That could increase like tree coverage too. All that being said, I am not up to date on what that group's looked into with that. So
I'll add another idea I had because I wanted something that could go alongside the tree planting and everything. And one of the ideas I had was invasive plant removal, because I know the New Zealand the ice plant is very invasive and very hard to get rid of. But I feel like utilizing resources from the city to actually make an effort to remove that and replace it with more native plants. I believe it's purple sage or so. I want to say replace it with native plants would help as well. Just
I have a comment actually on that. There are actually quite a few just like volunteer-based, groups. So in the community, or actually their job is like really that, just removing invasives, I think identify them and then just trying to like collaborate, like with them. That would be fantastic because I know there are several actually teams or actually doing that. And I have also something about the public, your comment. I think it's a very that's a great actually comment because we live in like a community that lots of these like rentals very old infrastructures, and because it's just like so expensive and because of the costs, they don't actually make an effort to improve and change anything. And just the fact that so the demand is very high, and they're just like, the only thing that they do is just like increasing the rents. And I was actually wondering if if there's any way that we can enforce actually the renewal of these like water systems, or because it's like a city's, long-term kind of like goal. And so I just feel like somehow just make everyone, responsible, especially like those, rentals we have, like, seems like one of the oldest kind of like infrastructures. So I wonder if there's any way to like so enforce them, or like some improvements, well, there is any way, like that would be the only way. Some of them are really kind of like, seems like they're very powerful, and they just like want to stay the way they are. And but I wonder if there's any way to like enforce actually that like improvement their, like water system, for instance.
And I have one more idea for the Neighborhood Improvement Commission. I know they have sometimes scheduled like dumpsters for community cleanups and stuff. But one of our strategies is e-waste and hazardous materials. And I was wondering if we might be able to get them to work that kind of drop off of hazardous materials and e-waste into their cleanup ideas.
I was gonna share something that's not related to the climate plan directly, but for the Neighborhood Improvement Commission, and I'm thinking about how I can bring this forward as a private citizen. I'm a docent in the sanctuary over in PG when the Pacific Grove, when the monarchs are here, when they overwinter here. So I'm very focused on pollinator health and habitat. And that's part of what I love about going through the pocket parks in Seaside, because they're just glorious for pollinators, and I'm in them every single day, and I love that. And I would love to see the signage that I'm seeing in those parks offered to citizens who have yards that are pesticide free and have pollinator habitat, even if they don't think of I have a tiny yard. I was like you, was a renter until last year, and we have a tiny yard, but we've turned it into a garden, and it's for pollinators. And I think there are a lot of yards like that in Seaside that people aren't intentionally creating. They're not using pesticides. They're not weeding. They're just letting things do their thing. And some people don't like that, but some pollinators really do like that. So I'd love to figure out a way to lift that up more, so that people can feel like no mowing is good. Not having a lawn is a good thing, but also not using pesticides is also a really good thing. So I'm thinking about that. And you'll hear me talk more about monarchs in the months to come. Hopefully they'll start showing up. I saw my first monarch of the season on actually Monterey State Beach on the weekend. So that was very happy to see. And there are things that our city has already done. Our mayor has already signed the pledge, the mayor's monarch pledge in the past. And so I was going to be encouraging him to do that again. And take additional actions, but they dovetail with things that are already in place, with mostly what the work that FOSPA is doing in the parks. And then in terms of the tree program that you've mentioned, Beth, I'd love to see the Neighborhood Improvement Commission focus on trees in non-stewarded parks. That would be something I could easily see myself writing a little note to the Neighborhood Commission about that.
Also with the private citizen lawns or gardens and stuff. I haven't looked at it in years, but I remember kind of like how the Arbor Foundation can establish like tree cities and stuff. I believe there were foundations and stuff that would, I guess, certify gardens as like natural wildlife protected areas. So maybe look into those, see if they can have that around here somewhere.
Yeah, the Pollinator Partnership does that. I've been through their training, and I know in the Capra Park, there's a sign that says, you know, Seaside's Bee City since 2019. I don't know how many people are even aware of that, about, you know, what that means and how it's not just about individual yards and parks. It's about a commitment that's ongoing, because you can't be a bee city for a day. It's and if you stop doing certain things, you stop being a bee city. So I think there's definitely room. And if you haven't enjoyed the pocket parks, especially on the work days, I don't do the work days because I do it at home, but I'm always really excited to be part of a community that cares so much about making the parks friendly for people and pollinators.
Any more comments or discussion on that item?
Guess I got one more
Yeah,
idea.
go for it.
It kind of goes along with the sidewalk helping, and or like a fund for those homeowners that either can't afford, for the ones that are homeowners, to replace the sidewalks and or fix up the sidewalks, is a fund to kind of help replace aging fence lines that are some of the wooden fences, or even get rid of some of the metal fences for private like owners, residences.
Okay, so then moving on to reports from commissioners.
Maybe something, maybe nothing. Maybe if you want to share with your fellow commissioners a little bit about yourself, we could totally open this up for that time of late meeting introductions. Up to you. All right, next slide. Next item. Both of these are no longer public hearing items. Staff does not have any reports. Besides, I'll be following up on a lot of things that came up tonight via email. So reply when you can. And with that, we do need a motion to adjourn in a second, and vocal yes for all those in favor.
To adjourn tonight's meeting.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. We'll stop the recording. Hi.
Hello. I'm sorry.